We're good? Ready? Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedals Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Safari Podcast Do YouTube Crazy Thing Wild bandwagon. It's great to have you. Today is a particularly spooky and scary day here in Abby's Safari World studio because today is Tales from the Studio Crypt Engineering Horror Stories Day. There is not one, not two, but three incredible guests lined up who are each going to be sharing an engineering horror story, Tales from the Studio Crypt, and what they learned from the experience. So I'm really excited to hear them. I freaking love horror movies, so I am here for the spooky vibes that are happening today. And here's our lineup for today's episode. First, we got Carl Bahner, an awesome engineer and co-host of the Secret Sonics podcast. Second in our lineup is Ben Wallick, an awesome producer and also co-host of the Secret Sonics podcast. So we got the whole squad on here today. If you guys haven't yet listened to the Secret Sonics podcast, I 10 out of 10 highly recommend. Last, but certainly not least, Noam, the founder of Safari Pedals, who has been our most frequent guest on the show. So I think that that's a crazy life achievement. So Noam, you get a gold sticker. I can't wait to dive into these horror stories, so let's just cut to it and do the thing. So guys, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Carl Bahner.
Hello.
Hello, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, thank you for being on. Before we dive into your very spooky and gruesome, horrible horror story, it's already like, bad memories. Let's start with who you are and what you do, and we'll take it from there.
I am Carl Bahner. I am a mix engineer and co-producer and studio brand strategist, and I am based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is rural Amish country. However, I am fully remote, and I have clients in 27 countries, and I absolutely love how weird the juxtaposition is between the things I do on a daily basis compared to the things that are outside of my window. I just love that. I started my career a long time ago as a session drummer and touring drummer. That was my main thing. That was what I thought I was going to do for the rest of my life. Spoiler alert, I found other things that I loved even more than that. But at the time, that was what I wanted to do. I really loved being a go-to mercenary on the drum set. And I spent quite a while living in the Philly area doing that, traveling, doing a lot of Philly, New York, DC kind of gigs, and doing a fair share of full US tours and going to Canada and England. But what I really thrived on was being put into situations where I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I thrived on being surprised, and I thrived on having to learn a lot of songs on short notice and figuring it out. And sometimes it didn't always quite work out. And that leads me to today's story. Oh gosh, this must have been 2012, 2013, somewhere in there. And I was, just a for-hire drummer for a bunch of bands in the Philly area. And in doing so, I also had a bunch of friends that were also, for-hire session players, whether they did session work or live gigging work. And one day I got a call from a buddy of mine who was a drummer, Andrew Toy. He's a wonderful guy. And he was playing drums in a new project with the guitar player, Chris Amat from the band Arch Enemy. They're like a Swedish metal band who I listened to a lot when I was in college. And Chris was one of the guitar players, one of the founding members. And he had recently moved to the States, like really close to where I lived. And I guess his girlfriend or fiance or eventually wife, I forget what they were at the time, worked at the Sam Ash Guitar Center. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say the Sam Ash Guitar Center, the Sam Ash Guitar Store that was pretty much like literally across the street from my house. Andrew called me and said that, he's starting in this project, is kind of classic rock with a little bit of metal influence, this project with Chris, and they needed a bass player. So I didn't own a decent bass or a bass amp because I was a drummer and I had like a crappy Squier bass and a practice amp. But of course, me being me, I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do it. So I long-term borrowed a friend's, I think it was like a Duff McKagan signature bass. and a bass amp. And I figured it out, and we did a couple gigs together. There were some really fun experiences during that time. One of which was I engineered Chris playing guitar for the first Baby Metal record. It's a weird anecdote because if you know Baby Metal, you know why that's a weird anecdote. And if you don't know Baby Metal, you should Google it and enjoy. But he played guitar on a track for it, and I engineered it, and it was really fun because it was fully remote. It was before I think it was before the first album came out. I remember there's this one moment in it where he wanted to use a tube amp, but his gear had not arrived from Sweden or wherever he was living before that yet. So we went across the street to that Sam Ash. We bought a used crank amp, like a tube amp, for like $200, brought it over to my place for the session, and then took it back and returned it like 3 hours later. And it was a really very different experience for me because it was my first time really engineering guitars much, because I was a drummer and I had some recording stuff, but it was just an extension of me being a drummer. It was for me to be able to record my friends' bands and, record rehearsals and stuff. And this was going to be like a fairly big release with this like absolutely phenomenal guitar player. First off, I should really point that out, that Chris is a monster guitar player. I was only in this band for a couple months, maybe like 3 or 4 months. I feel like it was really short because I definitely was not the right fit. I found that out pretty quickly because I was just not professionally prepared to jump into this, which brings me to the specifics of this story. Now, this still makes me want to cry. So I get a call, or I think it was a phone call or a text. It might have been I think it was a phone call. Again, this is like 12 years ago. I get a message from Chris saying that, they were playing a show in Tokyo, or outside of Tokyo, a big arena show, and the bass player that was supposed to do it either couldn't find his passport or something came up very last minute. The call was at like 1 a.m, and the flight was going to be leaving at 4 a.m. This was when I was only out of college for a couple of years, and I didn't have a passport. I hadn't ever traveled outside of the country by that point. So even if I wanted to do it, I couldn't do it because I didn't have a passport yet. And you can't get a passport in an hour's notice at 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't know if you've tried that before. So that's not really how that works. So what I ended up doing was trying to figure out a plan B. I talked with Chris and I tried to figure out a plan B. And what we decided that I would do is I was going to record all the bass parts, because a lot of the songs, like, we didn't have stems for them. They weren't recorded yet. So I was going to record the bass parts, send them to him, and then his drummer was going to play them back through a playback rig. Now, at this time in my career, I had never done anything with electronics on stage. I had never used an SPDSX. I've never used like a laptop or anything. Like, I don't think at that point, I don't know if I'd ever even used a metronome on stage. Which is so funny now because like maybe 2 years later, when I first got into my band Cheerleader, there were backing tracks for all the songs. I was playing and doing every rehearsal with a click track, and I started like really making that a main part of the projects that I was in. I was really trying to understand how to make the show higher production value using electronics. And I think part of the reason of that is because of the nightmare that happened when I was trying to figure this out for this Tokyo arena show, because I had no idea what I was doing. I had no clue. I had no experience with electronics or backing tracks. And it was before I had transitioned into the production side of things, and I was just a drummer. Well, and in this case, a bass player. So I wasn't even on my main instrument. So what I did was I, hooked up my bass to my interface, played along with the songs, and just recorded all the bass parts. I plugged it in DI, not realizing that they needed me to process it. I didn't record it to a click. I recorded it along with the MP3 of the song. I didn't know what I didn't know. This is why this was such a big learning experience for me, because I didn't know that I needed to do it along with a click track, because I was thinking, oh, well, the studio recording was to a click, so if I just play along with that, they'll be fine. I wasn't thinking, oh, well, the drummer needs a click to be able to play along with it. Like those really like basic things. I just had not ever experienced that before. So I didn't know what I didn't know. Yeah. So I sent them all the files, and it was just bass DI tracks that were played along with the song, like the MP3. It ended up being that they couldn't find a way to like make it work. They didn't have a laptop with them, because this is like 2012 maybe. So, traveling with a laptop wasn't as easy. doing things over the internet was not nearly as easy. And what they ended up doing was just doing the entire show without any bass parts in the house. And this was literally in an arena opening for Slayer with no bass.
And I've decided that I want to die.
Yeah, that is an appropriate face to make. So I like part of me, like, 2024 Carl, even 2014 Carl looks back at, 2012 Carl or 2013 Carl, whatever the year was. Like, what the hell were you doing? Like, how did you not know that? But I just genuinely had no idea.
There's a lot to learn from that. I think it's one of those like things, not just in music, but in life, like those big shitstorms where you look back and you're like, well, actually, that, character development, go powers that be. That was perfect. Just what we needed. Wow. So let's kind of break down the learning curve and impart some wonderful educational, inspirational knowledge to you all and to everyone.
So the big thing that I got out of that, ask for help. What I did before is if I realized I needed help, I would ask for help. The problem is we don't always realize that we need the help. So what I try to do now is, rather than asking for help when I realize I need help, I try to ask myself, is there anything here that I may be making assumptions about, but I am not actually certain that I'm right about that? If there are things that I'm making assumptions about, or I feel like I might be making an assumption about, I will ask and just clarify. And I would, like, in that situation, if I were in that situation now, I would be like, hey, do you need me to do this to a click? Is there anything, like any specific stuff that you need me to do? Because I've never done this before. And just admitting that I've never done it before. I love admitting when I don't know shit about whatever it is. Because that's the way that I'm going to learn the most, is just getting over that nervousness of feeling like I have to be this all-knowing, consummate professional that has all the experience in the world. Like, there's so much value in just saying, I am not quite comfortable with this. I want to learn. I want to do it right. And I want to make sure that I'm doing all of the things that you need. I don't want to leave you with any, untied loose ends, because you're trying to figure this out on the fly and I'm trying to help you out, but you're the one that's kind of in the thick of it, flying to another continent, as the band leader, doing this big show and trying to figure out how to, fix this issue of not having a bass player for the show. And when I say I didn't put the rest of the band first, I don't mean that I was like intentionally just thinking about myself. That's not what I meant. I didn't realize that I should really put myself in their shoes and figure out, what are the things that are causing them stress? What are the things that are going to help ease that stress? And if I don't know what it is, if it's not already very obvious to me, then I should just ask them, like, what can I do to make sure that this is going to be one less thing you have to worry about? So my biggest takeaway has nothing to do with the technology or the, playing bass or getting a passport, whatever that is. The biggest thing is just, if I'm going to make any assumption, it's to assume that I don't know the answer and ask.
Guys, there's a lot to learn from this, and there's no shame in asking, so ask away. Thank you so much for hopping on the pod. It was great to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So guys, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Ben Wallick.
Hey, how's it going, Abby?
What's up? Welcome to the show.
It's good. It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
It has. I think we should give the backstory before we dive in.
Yeah. Do you want to say it or should I say it?
I don't know. I guess we'll both give our little line about it. So when I was in high school, when I first jumped into the music world, Ben actually produced 2 singles that I had written, and that's where we know each other from.
Yeah. You were like this talented teenager, and we got to make 2 songs, and they came out really cool. And yeah, you're a great songwriter, so it was really fun to work with you. It was great. Good experience for me, and I hope for you also,
It was. First of all, it's super full circle to have you on the podcast, because you also are a podcaster, so it's like super epic in that sense, but also Ben really inspired me to get into music production. It was like seeing him in action in the studio, and I was like, I want to be able to do that too. I want to be like Ben. So
I'm humbled and honored.
He really supported me, and so you're a big part of my journey.
I really appreciate that, and I will continue to support you and have your back. So good luck with this journey. It's a long and arduous journey. There'll be highs and lows and hopefully lots of highs.
Thank you so much. I hope so too. I am hoping very much for more highs than lows. So before we dive into Ben's horror story, let's start with who you are and what you do, and we'll take it from there.
I'm a music producer, mixing engineer based in Jerusalem, originally from Brooklyn, New York, and I've been doing this for a while. I also have a podcast called Secret Sonics, where I used to interview other guests about their journeys and their approaches to music production and mixing and mastering even. And now it's kind of become a co-host sort of podcast with my buddy, Carl Bahner. And right now we're talking about different topics, and I hope at some point to get guests on again. I just kind of couldn't handle chasing down guests after 4.5 years, and I'm enjoying this new format. So yeah, we podcast and we talk about mixing and producing and mastering and everything in between. So it's fun. I love getting to get on a call every week with Carl now and talk about interesting things. So it's fun.
I tune in weekly, I will say. I love the pod.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Our podcasts are friends with each other.
They're best friends, actually. Pretty close.
Nice.
Pretty close buds. Let's dive in. It's horror story time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So how do I begin this? So I was debating about a bunch of different horror stories before I got on the call, and I decided to choose one, which was for me, I think, the most horrific because it just lasted the longest. And this is like a 6-month journey of trying to work with an artist until it ended. I'll try to tell the story, and maybe I could talk about maybe some lessons I learned from it. The story was this guy reached out to me, said, "Hey, I'm a singer-songwriter. I want to do this song, and I want to do something with like a live instrumentation and do like basically a live session with maybe some overdubs or whatever." And I said, "Great." And I quoted him a price. And I don't know what happened, but like at the same time that we're like, while we're having this discussion, the day that he came to record, we ended up just starting to track a full-on production, and we kind of decided to forego the live aspect of it. And then this turned into, a full-on production, but then the terms of the production just kept on changing. We did this really nice guitar session where we tracked acoustic guitars, and they came out really nice. And I said, "This is great." And he said, "This is great." I don't know how long afterwards it was, but he said, "The tempo is not right. Let's speed this up." And so we retracked all the guitars, we sped up the tempo, and then this thing just basically starts to like snowball into like more and more things, more and more work. We end up tracking violins, we end up tracking drums, like lots of crazy sessions and like last minute bookings and cancellations. And it's just like I'm looking through this like WhatsApp conversation we had about 6 years ago. It's just like all over the place. He's like, "Oh, I'm running late. Oh, actually I can't do today. Can you do this time?" And I'm like, "Oh, I could do this time tomorrow or this time, that time." And like constantly rebooking, switching things up. And I'm just basically like bending backwards to make myself, available for this guy. I'm always like calm, collected, and kind, and all these messages. The whole thing is just like a combination of like months going by, rescheduling, doing sessions, doing a lot of work, then doing nothing for a little bit. And at a certain point I said, this is like really getting beyond the scope of what I quoted you for, which was like originally supposed to be like a live session with like a little bit of extra. Like, I think we need to charge this. And I'm looking at these prices, and these are like really low prices. But at a certain point, we after we've tracked violins and guitars and bass and drums, we do vocals. And he kind of comes back to me after we do vocals. He says, like, "I'm really not so happy with the way the vocals sound. I think the key is wrong." So we've already like changed tempo. Then we tracked a lot of other instruments. We've gone back and forth. I'm printing mixes and backing tracks of the song, and he's like tweaking it with it in Cubase at home afterwards. And then we do these vocals, and he says, "You know what? The key is wrong. We got to change the key." And I said, "Okay, at this point we got to do things like on an hourly basis because I don't know where this is heading." And so like another month goes by, and before the month goes by, he says, "Yeah, that makes sense. We got to do an hourly basis." And my hourly rate was way too low. Month goes by and says, "Hey, can we chat?" Basically says we're going to go in different directions. I bent over backwards. I was so accommodating. I was quoting him like zero money, and he was just like being a perfectionist and tweaking everything himself. And at the end of the day, he still wasn't happy, even though I thought at the time we were doing a pretty good job for the key. That I thought the key was good. And I said, let's like make sure we know what the new key is going to be before we track more stuff. I was just like trying to like accommodate no matter what. And this guy to date has released one track since then. This is 6 years later. When he said it's not going to work, he's like, "I found someone else who's going to be who just makes more sense for me." And he still hasn't released pretty much anything. The one thing he released that I found on Spotify is just him and an acoustic guitar. So it's not even really a production. And so like my takeaway from this was this guy was never going to actually ever finish a song because he was just too perfectionistic. The song was too precious to him for him to like take a chance and see where a song could go. I guess I'm already jumping to the conclusions. I was just too flexible. I wasn't charging enough money, and the scope of the project wasn't discussed up front. Like we discussed something completely different at the very beginning of this process, and what ended up happening was just like a total mess. So that's kind of my horror story. Like, it was a 6-month process till we finally decided to part ways, or he decided to fire me. And I think there was like a whole thing of like, I did this much work, like you can't just pay me half. I don't remember exact details here, but it was something like that. It was like, you got to pay me more because I worked really hard. The whole thing was just so much agony and unnecessary work for a client that never really wanted to see something through. I could tell you other horror stories, but I think let's stick with this one.
That's a very long horror, like long in the sense that was many months of horror.
I was reading back through this WhatsApp conversation, and I'd basically forgotten almost all of it because it had been so long, and because I guess I just decided to forget it. And it was like giving me like visceral, like I was feeling really uncomfortable while I was reading through it.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for hopping on the pod.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yes.
Bye.
Bye, guys. We'll cut to the next horror story momentarily. Guys, guess who's back on the podcast? The one and only Noam.
Hey everyone.
That's the dude from the first episode.
It's that dude. Yeah. Abby's been killing the podcast. She's been doing an amazing job. I've turned from creator to fan, and now I just watch the podcasts and enjoy all of them.
That really means a lot. First of all, thank you again, first and foremost. And I'm happy that you're a fan of a pod. I would definitely hope so, since, it's part of Safari Pedals.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm probably the biggest fan of the pod.
He is the number one super fan. That's true. So today we are diving into engineering Tales of the Studio Crypt action horror story number 3.
Well, I have many, many horror stories because I've been doing this for a long time. I just picked one that I thought was the most appropriate. But before I tell the horror story, maybe I should put my my horror story apparel on. Ladies and gents.
I need to edit in like a tumbleweed and like music.
I just think it's more appropriate this way.
I agree.
To tell a story, especially if it's a horror story. So this story happened, I think, 15 or 16 years ago. I was learning my ropes as a studio geek and audio engineer. And one of my first gigs as an engineer was for... we actually talked about it in the pod. I think it was for Yellow Pages ad. So it's like an ad for like a phone number book or something. The reason I got the gig was because I was an assistant in the studio, and the engineer was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do these like stupid gigs anymore. I need someone else to take over, the simple kind of just recording voiceover overdubs for a jingle, for like a 10-second jingle. Noam, can you do it? And I was like so excited because up until that point I was assisting and I was like doing runner jobs, like bringing coffee and drinks and stuff to the studio. But I never actually sat in the chair of the engineer and recorded something. I was also like young and very kind of, I wouldn't say like cocky, but I was very confident in my engineering skills, even though I've never actually recorded a paying gig up to that point. So I was like, yeah, of course I can do it. And I was super excited. Got to the studio a little early and had everything set up. And then the overdub artist walks in and I can't get the ADAT, which was what we were using at the time, pre-computer days. Yes, there was a time where we recorded audio without a computer. The system didn't work. Like I was so excited and I was all sweaty. I didn't know what was going on, like what was wrong, but nothing was recording. The voiceover artist was like really frustrated and he's like, can we just like get this going? I got a schedule today. And it was supposed to be like a 1-hour voiceover session. I didn't know what to do. And then 10 minutes after that, the guy just walked out and he was like, figure your shit out and we'll find another date. And I was so frustrated. It turns out whatever, like the cassette of the ADAT wasn't pulled all the way into the recorder because I was so excited I didn't notice it. I called the engineer to tell him I screwed up. And then he was like, you thought it would be easy, right? And I was like, yeah, I thought it would be easy. He's like, well, now you learned your lesson, be prepared, prepare for everything in advance, make sure you have everything mic'd up, recorded, like before the guy walks in. And that was, I think, probably one of my biggest lessons ever, which was like, there's no such thing as being like over prepared. Like I tend to prepare for everything in advance. Lesson number 2, or like B, is when you're not the person in the chair, you never know how it feels to be in that position. Even though like you've been doing something similar that's like a chair away from, doing the recording yourself. A lot of times when you're sitting on the other's chair, you're assisting and you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is such an easy job. I can definitely do it. But it's a whole different world when it comes to like sitting in the chair and doing the thing. And it doesn't even have to be like engineering. I'm talking about any other job as well, where you're looking at someone doing something else and you're like, I can do that. Most chances are you could, but it takes practice and time and you need to be patient.
That was great. There's like a lot of lessons to pull from that.
Yeah, I think so. I really remember that day. Like that day to me was a big day, learning about myself and about the studio and about the industry and like what people expect from you, etc.
I'm also going to make sure to check my cassettes before I record things. And always make sure the cassettes,
Yeah,
properly.
make sure the cassettes are properly in the thing. Like, make sure.
Biggest takeaway, on those, how ADAT recordings be, fam.
Yeah.
Y'all know.
Yeah,
Y'all know what's
for
up.
sure.
But thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, of course. I'm looking forward to hear other horror stories and see how this one fits in.